Dynamics, balance armatures, electrostatics, these are some of the very common driver types you see in the IEM world. But what about planars? Hello and welcome again to another episode of Crinacle's Wild and Wacky IEM World. I am your host Crinacle, and today we'll be talking about a new up-and-coming trend in the IEM world. Planars. Now, planars aren't exactly a new technology. After all, if you see in the headphones world, planar headphones are a very popular genre in the headphones world. You have brands that specialize in just planar headphones. For example, you have Odysseys, you have HiFi Mans, you have the Rosons, you have various others, Dan Clark Audio sometimes. Very widely used, at least in one side of the industry. But when it comes to IEMs, it doesn't seem to be widely proliferated. Now, there are some IEMs, at least in the early days, that came out that try to use the planar technologies as the best as they can, but not exactly doing very well. More on that later. But at one point, there was one IEM that basically demolished the competition to the point where everyone else started jumping into the planar game again. I think you know what this IEM is. Now, I know that I'm actually one of the few people to actually start, shilling the timeless and calling it a very revolutionary product. In fact, you can look at my video where I shill the timeless. I think it has like 200,000 views at this point. This was the beginning. This was the start of the A tier for $200 IEM, and everyone else decided, wow, we should really capitalize on this as well. As they should. The timeless is a very, very good IEM. In fact, just calling it very good is just doing it a disservice. It is literally a revolutionary IEM, and you can see why. A tier for $200, 3 stars. The entire market is broken at this point. But as I've mentioned in my timeless video, this wasn't always the case. In the early days, IEM planar technology wasn't exactly good. Take Odyssey for example. They were one of the first to come out with IEM planar technology with the iSign series, and then after that the LCD I series. But the huge, massive problem with all of these planar IEMs is that they were tuned terribly. They were dog shit, basically. No one should really use them without EQ. EQ is mandatory. I can see why the tune is a little bit wonky. There's a kind of huge 1K pump followed by a massive depression in the upper mids. Why? Well, probably because due to how the waveguides work in the iSigns and the LCD I series, they can't really do much without completely screwing up the distortion response or whatever. But this was the beginning. There were some other attempts as well with some weird hybrid stuff that included planar drivers, but as I've mentioned, most of them just really were not great, at least until the timeless came about. But you know what else is timeless? A good VPN. Jesus Christ, this is such a scuffed segue. Have you heard of NordVPN? Of course you have. You're on YouTube. Other YouTubers have probably shilled you in the past before, but now it's my turn. Ever since NordVPN gave me a free trial just to test out their product before doing this ad read, I've been genuinely using their service quite a lot. One of the more obvious of which would be for Netflix. Netflix, the service that you probably forgot that you're still subscribed to. With NordVPN, I can unlock all the shows that are not available in my home country. And unfortunately, being on the tiny island of Singapore would also mean that a lot of shows are being banned here for whatever reason. But I guess besides the obvious, NordVPN also comes with the threat protection feature. It blocks malware, it stops intrusive tracking, avoids malicious ads, and the best part is that all of these cybersecurity features are on even if you're not connected to a VPN server. Simply put, if you're looking for a VPN, why not go with Nord? Go to nordvpn.com/crinacle to get 61% off a 2-year plan plus 1 month free. All of this is also risk-free with NordVPN's 30-day money-back guarantee. One final time, go to nordvpn.com/crinacle. Support the people who support me. Alright, where did I stop off? Right. The timeless. After the timeless came out and suddenly boomed in popularity, there was now a mad race to capitalize on the planar hype. And one of the first on the scene after the timeless was the LETSHUOER S12. Right off the bat, there's already a significant edge on the S12. It was $50 cheaper than the timeless. So just simply matching the performance of the timeless was enough to propel this into superstardom. Both the timeless and the S12 are pure planar setups. They only use one planar driver per ear. No hybrid shenanigans here going on. So it was literally a one-on-one fight, a direct answer to the timeless. But I guess now the big question is whether or not the S12 actually lives up to the hype. Is it actually a mini timeless for cheap? Not quite. Now you see, the timeless, as popular as it may be, as all-rounded as it may be, still had a little bit of quirks when it comes to its tuning. For one thing, there have been multiple reports on the timeless being a little bit too sharp and shouty, that being it had a lot of treble. Some people even found the timeless fatiguing. I didn't find it that way, but there were enough reports out there for me to at least tell you guys that yes, you may find it fatiguing. So why am I telling you this when I'm talking about the S12? Well, for all its quirks in the timeless in terms of tonal balance, the S12 on the other hand dials it up to 11. The S12 has more treble. The S12 has more upper mids. The S12 is basically a more V-shaped version of the timeless. Would you prefer that? Probably, but as I said, where the timeless was just on the edge for me, the S12 just blows past the barrier. To me, it is on the shouty side. To me, it is on the sharp side. To me, it even has bouts of sibilance on it. But for all my tonal nitpicks on the S12, one thing still stands out. This thing is just as technical as the timeless. That's right, the S12 has A-tier technical performance for $170. That's insane. So you may just simply overlook its slightly more offensive tonality in favor of its frankly insane technical performance. Again, $170. This is planar territory. This is the strength of a planar. They can just be the most detailed resolving and provide great soundstage for apparently a super cheap price. But as far as if you ask me, I would still prefer the timeless, so this is still just a B+ overall. B+ tone, A technicalities for a still extremely handsome 2-star rating. This thing is good. But the S12 isn't the only new kid on the block. After all, we have other competitors now coming in after, you know, the bloodbath that is the timeless. Next up on our little shootout would be the new, extremely new actually, Raptgo Hook-X. Raptgo, as far as I know, is an extremely new brand, to the point where this is literally their first IEM. And honest to God, for their first IEM, they have knocked it off the park. But it does not beat the timeless or the S12. Let me explain. Let me just talk about technical specifications because this is actually quite interesting. The Hook-X has a planar driver, a piezoelectric tweeter, and a bone conduction driver. That is a tribrid with a permutation that I've never heard before. Honestly, this is the most unique driver setup that I've heard thus far. And to top all of that off, this is the best tuned of the shootout. This is good. For this kind of weird driver setup, honestly, that's quite an achievement. I was expecting far worse. For one thing, I have a personal disdain for the piezoelectric driver. I don't know what is it about the driver, but almost every IEM that I've heard that uses the piezoelectric tweeter just sounds off, just sounds not great. It sounds sharp actually. Shout out to BQEYZ because they love to use the piezoelectric tweeter, and a lot of the IEMs just have the weirdest treble I've ever heard. But on the Hook-X, I hear none of the weirdness. It just sounds normal. I don't hear that zinginess, I don't hear that twang, I don't hear the weird timbre that I usually hear in other piezoelectric sets. So this comes out as a win right off the bat. The other caveat that I have would probably be on the bone conduction driver. I mean, this is a common criticism that I have on bone conduction drivers and IEMs in general, because I don't hear it. I don't feel it. Let's put it at that. I think Unique Melody is one of the more popular IEM brands that use bone conduction technology in their models, and in almost every single case, I can't really tell that there is a conduction going on in there. I don't know, maybe there's placebo, maybe I feel it, but it's not obvious to the point where I could pinpoint that there is something unique in that driver setup. I don't know. Same goes in the Hook-X. So when I put it in, I hear a good IEM. I don't feel anything extra, and if I do, it's so minute to the point where I could literally just chalk it up to placebo or something, I don't know. But I guess the main star of the show is the planar driver, which I assume carries out the rest of the frequency range, and it's not the best. This is where I go back to the whole technical performance thing again. Next to the Timeless and next to the S12, this is very soft. It's very dull. And it's not soft in the presentation like the Timeless is. This is just like low res. Well, not that low res, but at least in comparison to the S12 and the Timeless, this is clearly one step down, which is kind of concerning because this is the most expensive one in the shootout at $240, a good $20 more than the Timeless. The soundstage seems narrower. I don't get a lot of that wide sounding nature that I usually get from the Timeless and the S12. This just seems a lot more congested and compressed, if you want to use that kind of language. But if you just want to ignore the technical performance, again, this is the best tuned. This has the right amount of upper frequency balance. This doesn't sound shouty, neither does it sound overly withdrawn in the upper mid frequencies. It strikes a good balance. It's not sharp, it's not overly sibilant. In fact, it might go in the opposite direction. It might be a little bit too dark for some people. So for the Hook-X, I give an excellent A+ tuning, but on the technical side, I'll have to give it a B. Still good, by the way, still very, very good, just probably not as good as the other two, which at an overall rating of B+ still puts it solidly in the 2-star category. A very, very good IEM that you should definitely put in consideration if you ever like this kind of sound signature and, you know, maybe want something with an interesting driver setup. And yes, the planar train doesn't stop there. We still have one more, and that is the latest release from Tin Hi-Fi. Yes, that Tin Hi-Fi. The P1 Max. I guess we have to go down into a little bit of history with Tin Hi-Fi's planars. Tin Hi-Fi came up with the original P1 back in God knows what year. Timmy, please put up the year. Thank you very much. It was very well received. A lot of people love it. A cult quickly formed around the P1. And what most people might not know is actually I had a very small hand in tuning and feedbacking the final tuning of the P1. But my final criticisms were a little bit scathing, at least relative to the praise that it was getting. I thought that the P1 was still extremely not technical, which was surprising because it's a planar. The P1 was just really soft and dull sounding. There was virtually no resolution. Sure, it was tuned well because, you know, I kind of had a hand in that. But as an overall IEM, it was still a bit just mid. And then Tin Hi-Fi tried their hand again in the planar world. Then we got the P2, which is, well, relative to the world that we have today, really expensive. It came out at $300+. It was decidedly a very good and much needed improvement over the P1, but still had a super sibilant treble that I just couldn't handle. I mean, I as a young, God knows how old I am, guy, couldn't handle the kind of high frequency power that it was letting out. And then we have the P1 Plus, which was another revision of the original P1. It was a good improvement, but still not great. It was a small improvement. It's not like a huge revolution and a huge overhaul of the IEM itself, but at least they got it out there that, hey, you know, if you want to buy the P1, at least buy the P1 Plus, because it's not shit. And now finally rounding off the P1 series in all typical Tin Hi-Fi fashion, we have the P1 Max. I don't know why they left. Just make a new model, guys. Do you really have to use the P1 name again? It's not even, it doesn't even look like a P1. So now the P1 is the newest kid on the block. They now promise to be another worthy contender in the planar game, and do they deliver? No. In comparison to everything else that we've tried out today, the P1 Max is simply inferior in the tonal and technical department, which is pretty much a death knell in a highly competitive market such as this. The P1 doesn't seem to have much of a place. It might sound harsh when I say it, but yeah, it's outclassed. The P1 Max isn't something that I consider particularly well tuned. It's just a combination of a lot of very small factors that eventually just add up. The upper mid-range response generally follows a decent level of emphasis, not overly low, somewhat overly low I guess, but definitely not too high. But there's also a weird recession in the lower mid-range, and All in all, whenever I hear the P1 Max, I just feel like something feels off, especially when vocals come on. Arguably the thing that we human beings would recognize at first glance, or first hearing, I guess. Why did I say glance? And relative to the rest of the competition in this planar landscape, and of course in the other drivers as well, the P1 Max just simply loses out. It's not the greatest, and not the greatest is already just a huge red flag. Don't get me wrong, this, relative to everything else in Tin Hi-Fi's P lineup, is the best. The most technical, the best tuned, and therefore if you are really looking for something in the Tin Hi-Fi catalog, this is probably something that you should be looking into. But relative to everything else though, it's just, in my opinion, it is the worst pick. Don't bother. Technical performance at B- with a tonal grade of B does put it at the bare minimum of a 1-star rating, worth the price, which is honestly only the case because of his $170 price tag, which is pretty good relative to everything else because a lot of other things are just dog. And that, my friends, is the roundup of all of the significant planar IEMs that are out in the market today. Again, let me just reiterate: the Timeless, the S12, the Raptgo Hook-X, as well as the Tin Hi-Fi P1 Max. I'll say that between all of them, the only one that's really out of the race is the P1 Max. And the other three do have their places. For example, if you want something that's a lot more V-shaped, then go for the S12. It is just as technical as the Timeless, but just with the caveat that it is more bright and potentially more sharp and more fatiguing. And of course, you know, the $50 discount is sweet. It is definitely enticing. The Hook-X is probably the most different out of the three. Is not the most technical, but is the most safe tuning, and of course comes with the clout of having a really weird kind of driver configuration. Again, bone conduction, piezoelectric, and a planar. Jesus Christ, I've again never heard of that before. But I guess the big question in the title is this: is planar the future of IEMs? Yeah, I can see it. Not necessarily the future, but at least gonna be as popular as planars are in the headphones world. As you know, within the headphones world, planars hold a significant spot in the conversation. Almost every time you talk about one of the best headphones in whatever price bracket, there's always a planar that occupies some kind of value in there. In the top tiers, you have the Sasvaras, the LTD5s and whatever. In the bottoms, you have the HE400s and the LCD2s and so on and so forth. Planars are very common in the headphones world. Not as common as IEMs, but I do feel like they do have the potential to be just as common in the IEMs world as well. It is a sweet driver technology, no doubt about that, but I guess the biggest hurdle has been accomplished, which was just tuning a planar driver right. It used to be that there is the assumption, mainly proliferated by me, that with planar drivers there always has to be the risk of it having really shitty tuning. But I guess with the recent releases, now our fears have more or less been alleviated. If your new planar IEM now comes with terrible tuning, congratulations! It has been outdated the moment it has been released. So with that in mind, I look forward to welcoming our new planar overlords. Let us all come together and worship them. Hopefully. Maybe. We'll see. And so with all that said and done, allow me to thank my big money boys. Here are all of your glorious names if you have subscribed to my $20 Patreon. And for those who are my $30 industry standard blokes, allow me to say out your names: McMadface, Dennis, Laughing Psychonaut, Jerry Liu, HK57, Fisk, Nooft, TJ Daly, Mr. Overlord, Trout, Charlie, Road 222, Crinacle, Beltrimo, Rodrigo, The Angry Persian, Danimals, Mr. Crinkle Mania spelled my name Alicia Burrito wrong, and now I'm sad. I'm assuming this is Alicia Burrito. Zuni Royer, Alex9468, Lawrence Yo, and Andrew Wilson. Thank you all. I'm such a busy boy, but regardless, we still have to stick to our weekly upload schedule. So with that in mind, see you next week, and don't die. Fuck off.